Hi, and welcome everybody to our 20th Open Clock Club from How to Repair Pendulum Clocks. Hope you're all having a great week out there. Been lots going on here, both horologically and otherwise, as always. So we've got quite a lot to get through tonight. Now we're going to get back onto our escape wheel a bit later on. You may remember that we'd refaced the pallet, and then last week we put the escape wheel in the depthing tool and determined that that it's probably mounted eccentrically. Now I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be able to do about that, but let's just revisit that. But what I wanted to do first was to look at this mainspring, because it's damaged at the end and it wasn't exactly planned. So we'll see how that goes. But I thought it would be quite good fun to look at that and how we would go about a repair. It's the clock that we did the repivoting on, and that clock has been in bits now for, I don't know, 3-4 months. It was one of our book one, which you can see up here. There we are, How to Repair Pendulum Clocks. So the first question is on the live chat is, what project is your longest standing project? And I think I know who's going to win this competition, that has got finished. Not the longest standing project that's still ongoing, because of course we've all got those. But what's the longest project you've ever had that actually got finished? And so that's the first thing through the live chat. Do remember, as always, this session is being recorded. So if you want to remain anonymous, then please keep your camera turned off. The archive version of it will go on our YouTube channel later this evening, all being well. And just before I jump into this, massive thank you, as always, to those people who followed us through the week on Facebook. You're all absolutely brilliant, helping beginners. Remember, this did start as a beginners thing some time ago, and we've picked up some incredibly experienced clockmakers and horologists along the way. So thank you to everybody who helps what has become, I think, somebody just on Facebook a few minutes ago said, a really friendly community, and I want to keep it that way. So thanks to all you people. We had a good live stream on Thursday. Slightly forgotten what we did now with our rusty long case clock. Oh yeah, we started cleaning. Well, I've kind of finished the first stage of the cleaning now. So next week we're going to be into the repairs on that clock. So please do join us there. Okay, as always, we've got Team Open Clock Club doing the live chat. That's at least half the energy of these sessions. So please say hello. And so this is, let's just zoom out a little bit. I'll stand up. This is Smith's Enfield single train mantle clock. You're probably all familiar with it. I've cleaned the thing here. Here's all the bits. If we get time, we'll put it together. I was going to do this live and just kind of put it together within reason as quickly as I could. And then I got to the mainspring. And what I saw was, let me just get some gloves. What I saw was that the end is cracked. Now we see this quite a lot with mainsprings, that the outer hooking, partly because of the way it's been designed, partly maybe just age and wear, and partly maybe because of this idea of a clock kind of being overwound, which we know there is no such thing as an overwound clock, in a sense. But I think what happens, and please let us know what you think in the live chat, is the clock, it doesn't work. The clock stopped. So somebody comes along and kind of understandably they say, well, if I just give it a little bit more of a wind with the key, then it might work. Now with a French clock, so a 19th century French clock, you often see the ends of those springs torn out because they're thin springs. They're only about 0.25 millimeters or somewhere like that. With a clock like this, it's much more difficult because the springs are actually quite strong. I think we kind of conjectured that in these mid-20th century clocks, they fitted really strong springs, so there was loads of supplementary arc, so you can kind of put the clock where you want, and it's not too susceptible to being in beat. So this spring is pretty chunky, but nevertheless, I don't know whether you can see, let's just have a go at zooming in, that the spring is cracked. You can just about see there and there as well. So it's cracking on both corners. Now, we could leave it, of course, and who knows, it might be absolutely fine for decades and decades, if not forever. Or it could be that those cracks will migrate and the spring will break, and that could cause a problem to the rest of the train. So as an exercise, I thought it would be good fun to reshape this. So if you have a clock like this, you've got the first question, because it's always about the thinking and the questions. And that is, do you file this to reshape it? Now, the problem is, if I can find my, here we are, bit of paper. Let's just do an approximation of this shape. So it's like that, a little curve, and like that. So the hooking or the hole in the end of the spring looks something like that. Just have a look at the inside as well, so if we can see. Yeah, it's probably the same on the inside. So they've used the same punch. Now, without sounding critical of the manufacturer, they kind of put the curve on the wrong end, because what's happened here with these corners being quite sharp, there's a crack formed and a crack formed like that, because of course the force is in this direction. So this is not the ideal, I think, shape for a spring. These corners need to be more radius. Let's just draw this to scale. So it's something like that. And then the end is this kind of shape. Now, our problem in here is if we file this away in the corners, it's one side, I think it's about 2 millimeters, and the other side it's about 1.5 millimeters. But of course, that's only the bit we can see, sort of without etching it or x-raying it something. There's always a risk there, of course, that the crack has actually migrated much further than we can actually see. Let's have a look. Yeah.
No, it said Anneal the cut of the rehole if you file will be weaker.
Yeah, anneal it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna do. Yeah. Yeah, so the visible bit is about 1.8 millimeters. Now, if I were doing this, if I were making a new clock, which I'm not, I would not make the hooking quite this shape. Now, with relatively modern clocks like this, it's reasonable to assume, but don't assume anything, of course, that the hooking here, this bit, is in the middle of the barrel, but that's not always the case with all the clocks. Handmade stuff, that's often quite noticeably offset for whatever reason. So if you've got a spring that's quite narrow here in the hole, then it can be restricted, and so it rubs either on the barrel body or inside the barrel cap. So ideally, I would make the shape something more like this. Right, doesn't actually matter about this end, of course. So I would try and make these corners much more radiused, so you don't have that same stress riser. But you also, particularly on older clocks, as tempting as it is just to drill a hole in it or to file a hole in it, you need a little bit of lateral movement, so the spring can center itself between the barrel wall, the great wheel, inside the great wheel, and the barrel cap. Because as I said, on older clocks, sometimes if you put it in the middle, it will bind and it can stop the clock. So I'm going to Now, this is one of those ongoing questions that is one of our favorite questions of all time, and that's about making improvements. And for me, I don't want to make any improvements. I'm not interested in improvements. I'm interested in what the clock is as it kind of lands on the bench. However, there's also that sort of balance of the thing being reliable and so on and so forth. So because we've got 3 options here, 4 options, as far as I can tell. 1 is to leave it. 2 is to file it. 3 is to chop it off and make a new hole. And 4 is to make a new spring. So I don't know whether any of those are your preferred thing. Again, in the live chat, love to know. So leave it, file it, chop it off, fit a new spring. I don't want to fit a new spring. I've banged on about springs before, wherever possible. I think this spring is the earlier original spring. I don't want to change it unless I have to do. Well, I don't have to do. So my next option would be to anneal the end and shorten it. But of course, maybe you can do that once, maybe you can do it 2 or 3 times, but you don't want to shorten the spring if you don't have to do. So my question is, just measure this here now. Chop it off and make a new hole.
Everyone's saying chop it off. Yours says chop it off.
Right. Okay. So the consensus on live chat seems to be chop it off and make a new hole, which we can. But what I'll do first is I will file it, because sometimes, you know, that crack. Let's just have a little look here. The crack's not running straight across, so it's 6 millimeters. So we're going to lose 2 of our 6 millimeters. Now, this is a strong spring. I'm going to file it first, and then I'm going to chop it off. Now, if you chop it off, what's quite useful to get you started is to have a really, like a clockmaker's staking tool, but like a really strong one. I think John Wilding, in one of his excellent books, shows you how to make a kind of punch. I know is Ian there? Yes. Ian's got about every tool under the sun. He might have one of these tools. So anybody got one of these mainspring punching tool things? Because what I'm going to have to do is to drill a hole and then use a piercing saw, which is, well, I'm happy to do that. I don't know whether I should do that tonight because I'll get so distracted. So the first thing here, irrespective of whether you are chopping it off and making a new hole, or whether you are changing this one, is to anneal the end. Now, I think if you, let's just get rid of that paper, because there is actually a couple of things I can show you that are quite useful. And you can see, well, the spring's already been annealed back to there. So if we get a file, I'm going to take my gloves off, because when I'm using the heat, the gloves can set on fire, which obviously I don't want to do. So let's just take a file and just test it. Yes, that's reasonably soft, whereas the spring part is quite skiddy and feels quite hard. Anyway, we like to set things on fire, so let's just quickly anneal the end. I'm just going to heat it to orange. Of course, it would have helped if I'd gone and got the block to put it against to reflect some of the heat back. Anyway, let's just give that a minute or two to cool down. Just put it in the vise. because I'm bound to grab it when it's really hot, and looking around for the other vise. So this is the same, irrespective of which, whether you're cutting off or you're changing the shape of this hole. I wouldn't replicate that hole if I'm going to cut the thing off. Maybe because we've got other things to do tonight. We can do that next week. Just let people in. Oh, Rachel's at it already. You don't want to replicate it with those sharp corners because otherwise the same problem might just happen again. So got round file here and a bit of a finer one as well. I don't know what this file is, but you'll notice it doesn't have a handle on, so the usual hypocrisy there with putting files on handles on all my files. Whoops, excited. Ah, it's nice. It's a Bedford file. That's cool. It's some new old stock thing that I bought many years ago. Let's just quickly pop a handle on there, then we can start filing. So here's our little Python file handle, as always. Now, normally what I do is I would drill a hole in the side. I made a video about this, I don't need to explain it. Soak the thing in water first, then heat it, and then drive it on. But just for filing this now, I'm just going to tap it on, and I can do it properly later. It's quite nice to have a little bit of time anyway while the spring end is cooling down. So let's just drive that on. Okay. Not how I would normally do it, but actually that's okay. It's reasonably firm. So hopefully now the spring has cooled down a bit. Yep. So first I'm just going to file out those corners. Has anybody said whether they've got one of those punches for punching a hole in the spring? Right, okay. Oh, well, there is your answer. So we're going to have to cut the end off because it's broken off anyway. Gosh. Oh, well, there you go. Right. So plan B. Now, the problem with cutting it off and making a new end, the only kind of difficult part to this is drilling the hole in it. So I'll have to think quite how I'm going to do that, but why not? So here we go. I'm going to get the sheet to actually anneal it a bit better because that seemed incredibly sort of brittle actually, but there you go. At least we can see now where it was kind of cracked through to. There we are. Some intervention. All you people saying, cut the end off, cut the end off. It worked, all that mind. Those mind games. The power of collective thought. Right, okay. So what I'll do is, this should be a bit easier. Because I just want to allow it to cool just a little bit slower for that first part so it doesn't remain brittle. So I'll get a bit more gas. Well, this is the problem, isn't it? Never do anything live. But I know that's what we're all here for. I don't think it'll punch through. I could try. If it was a French clock spring, yeah, you could just use a regular watchmaker staking set and punch through, a bit like you would if you were making a suspension spring. You can punch through that, no problem. I've got a feeling this is going to be too tough, but I'm happy to drill a hole and then I'll just use a piercing saw to cut it out. It'll take a while, but that's what we're here for after all. Right, okay, cool. I'm just going to leave that while I get my cutters. Some snips and piercing saw blade. The key thing when you finish the hole, whatever shape you make it, is that you draw file round the edge as the kind of last thing before you finish the work. If you imagine, scrappy bit of paper, if you imagine you are filing through the spring with any file, sort of under a microscope, the edge is going to look like that, kind of exaggerated, but it's going to look something like that. And each one of these little points is going to be a stress riser, which is what we're trying to get away from. So once you've filed the hole to shape, then this is the hole here, then you would finish by draw filing round and round. In fact, that's what we will do if we get that far. So everything is either red hot or singed, just the way that we like it. So let's just have a look. I'm just going to cut this off curved at the end. Never used these cutters before, these shears, so let's see if they're strong enough. Not bad. Just file it a bit to tidy it up. Good. Oh, well, we've achieved something, if nothing else. Right, so the next bit is going to be to just draw on the shape that we want. Now, people who've been following along for the past 20 weeks or something know that I don't like to use Sharpie pen or make any mark, in fact, on a clock. I think in most of the time it's unnecessary. There's usually plenty marks already there. But in this case, he said, again, slightly contradicting myself, I'm just going to draw on the shape that I think we're interested in. So I've lost. So something like that. So I want to keep the radius of these corners as big as possible. Okay, so now the tricky bit, which is going to be getting a hole in here. I'm just going to center punch it first. Got a new, not a center punch, but a really useful drift kind of punch today. Sometimes, maybe not in clockmaking, but this nice, let's have a look. So I'll show you this tapered punch. I don't know what I'm going to use it for, but it's the axle out of a bike pedal, a bike I've been working on. So let's just get a hammer. Getting there with my camera in the way. And that's the tricky bit. So let's just see if we can drill a hole in here. So ideally here, again, slightly underwhelmed by equipment, but I think, again, probably Ian's got one of those drilling clamps with 2 fingers. And again, that was described by John Wilding in one of his books. And that's a really useful device for this, because of course, what you've got here, if the drill is to grab, you've got a really potentially dangerous situation where the thing is spinning around. So I'm going to just drill it by hand because we don't have any other way of doing it, and also we're live on air, so I'm just going to drill through. But yeah, when you're drilling, particularly drilling brasses, make sure that the work is really well clamped. If you've ever used a drilling machine and drill brasses, you probably had a horror story of the drill grabbing in the brass, and then the brass starts spinning around and it kind of causes a circular saw type device. And you can get around this by either using drills that are particularly ground for brass with a slow helix, or by adapting the cutting edge to make it safer so it doesn't grab. But anyway, this should be all right. It's just a case of how the heck we're going to hold it. Right, okay, so already got, was relatively smart and organized. So I'm going to go get my hand drill now and see if we can drill a hole in it.
A small hole in each of the 3 corners, and then saw the hole out and file on his torsion blocks.
And file a what?
And saw the hole out and then file.
All right, okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Small hole, saw the hole out and then file.
Yeah. Yeah, Derek's absolutely right. A lot of the books talk about chain drilling. I've never had any luck with chain drilling difficult materials. Let's try to find a drill that's sharp. But you could drill, as Derek said, drill all 3 corners and kind of join up the dots. Let's try this. Might be a bit small for getting the piercing saw blade in, but let's give it a whirl. There we are. Miracles do happen. Good, yeah, we should be okay there. So our piercing saw table. Hopefully you can see and I can see. Yep. And this is where if you had a way of punching the thing with a much bigger punch, then of course you would be halfway. You could probably just file it without this piercing saw, but hopefully it won't be too bad. Try and get to it somehow. Suppose I could turn the spring upside down, which would probably help. Right, there we are. So we have one incredibly rough hole that we're going to file now. The sewing?
Yeah, make it a easy.
Oh, the John. Ah, that's nice. It actually, I might go back to my piercing. I might go back to my piercing saw table to do this. It's probably easier to do it, and then you can see actually looking down on it. But right, let's just. Again, this is one of those areas where you might say, I don't want to use my best files, because files that have been used, even annealed mainspring, are probably not brilliant on filing brass later, but I don't have, well, it's not that I don't have the luxury of going and finding different files, it's just too much of a faff. So we've got 5.7, 6.2, so it just needs to move across. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the piercing saw table so I can just do the thing horizontally. I think that's going to be easier. A little bit of a change back. Glasses. Actually see. Hey, gosh, that's better. Cool. So I'm just going to use something like a small barrette file or a half round file now. Sun's just, I'm going to have to close the blind as well in a minute. A half round file just to get those straight edges going. So let's have a little look. So here we've got 4-inch barrette file, which is really nice. We'd made that file video and, oh, thank you. Great. It's enough. Thanks, brilliant. And we made that file video, and I think in that we said that the barrette is such an incredibly useful file. Somewhere I've got my smaller round file. Can you see that? Oh yeah, it's not too bad. Okay, so not, you can see there, obviously down here, easier, better. not the most beautiful thing yet, but we can spend time tidying it up. I don't actually want to spend too much time on it because we've got so many other fascinating things to do. But I want to show you two things with this that are really important. On these clocks, the hooking tends to be really big. I've lost all the parts now. So when you look inside the barrel like this, for beginners there, you can see, my pointy stick. Oh, sorry, I should have said at the beginning, extra special welcome to beginners, of course. That's why we're really here. So I hope this is of use. You can see in there inside the hooking, this hooking is punched out of the barrel wall. On most other kind of clocks that we tend to come across, the hooking is a separate piece of steel that's riveted in. And often what happens is either the hooking has gotten damaged and somebody files it down, or the spring hasn't hooked and it runs around inside the barrel when you're trying to hook it on. And so there isn't much to go at there, is my point. So two things I'm going to show you that'll help with that. But remember, most important thing now, let's just say I've spent a bit more time on this and gotten the hole neat. The really important thing is to draw file round the hole. Most of our file marks are going through the hole and they're just going to cause stress rises. So we're going to take yeah.
Jane got a jeweler's saw with a bunch of files, but I have no idea which one to use for what.
A whole lot of blades.
Yeah, just broken a couple of them already. Have you got any suggestions?
Right, okay. Yeah, the piercing saw blade or jeweler saw blade is a good question. Thank you, Jane. In the old days, sort of 20 years ago or something, I used to really use the finest blades I could, but now I can't really see anymore. And also you kind of get, I used to get obsessed by saying, want to get 4 knots or something. So 0 in a piercing saw blade here at least is kind of a medium. Then you've got 2, 4, and 6, and then on the other direct they're going coarser, and on the other direction you've got 2 knot, 4 knot, and 6 knot. 6 knot being, I think, about the finest you can get. Use the finest blade you can, basically, because it's going to cut quicker. And when you're cutting thin material, it's a bit like with a wood saw, I suppose. You want quite a few teeth on that material. If you're cutting very thin material and you've got a coarse blade, you might only have 1 tooth on there working at that time, and it'll just tend to jam the whole time. So my advice would be to go for the finer end of the blades, if you can get away with not breaking too many. And if you're making hands, which we're going to be doing for our live stream clock in a few weeks' time, then when you're getting into those really sharp corners, then you can only really do a neat job with a fine blade, otherwise you just end up having to file and file and file. So this, and now, sorry, they've finished that slightly dull story, is now all my blades, the ones I'm using up from the past 20, 30 years, and I just grab the first one and use it, which is probably not that helpful, but, so I'm just going to tidy a little bit. Not too bad. I could do a bit more, but anyway, let's just do the important 2 things. One is the filing round the hole, particularly down here. Can you see that? Yeah, you can, yeah. Particularly in these corners. Remember, it's always going to be the corners where the thing splits. We've made these corners quite a bigger radius than the ones that the manufacturer did, which should help. And also, I presume that hole was punched out anyway, so they certainly wouldn't have done this. There we are. So we draw file ground. I'm using a kind of oval file. I think this has got a proper name. I don't know what the name for it is, but let's call it an oval file. And then the important thing doesn't matter here because that hooking is quite big. But if you've got one of those springs where the barrel where the hooking's really worn or small, then if you file here, top tip, people, if you file in here on the from the inside, if you can see that or not. Sorry, wobbly camera. That's just going to allow a shorter hooking to get a hole because it's coming from the inside there. And in that respect, just finish the draw filing there. No, you leave it annealed. Just leave it annealed, it's fine. Leave it as it is. So the last thing is on the inside, again, this is the inside of the spring, again, to help with the hooking when we put the spring back in the barrel, is just to get a ball peen hammer here and very gently sort of slightly dome it a little bit. So no, the ends are tempered when you get them. So just leave it, as long as it's not a kind of crazy amount, just leave the inch or actually it's a couple of inches here, isn't it? Tempered. So this is quite a good top tip. If you've ever got that problem where it's really difficult to get the spring hooked, then I don't know if you can see that there, but it's ever so slightly kind of bulged out a little bit here. It's just to help the hooking get hold of it. Right, now I do want to get this back in the barrel, but because we are on 44, we're going to leave the reassembly to next week. So that was a kind of bit of a bonus. So we'll come back to that and we'll move on to the escape wheel. But let's just have a minute of comfort break because I could do with a drink. So just have a look what time it is. So it's 44. So let's come back at 47. We'll start again at 47, okay? Right, okay, let's get back to our escape wheel, which was where we kind of left off last week. So just to recap, somebody did actually ask about internal and external drop again. For the spring, yeah, the message was you don't need to harden the end of the spring. The spring needs to be quite soft and kind of compliant anyway. You certainly don't want it brittle. So when you buy them new, the end is, or should be, annealed. So just leave it as it is. So remember this, let's see if I can get to go backwards. We refaced one of our pallets, and last week we looked at this wheel because, as you can see, it's absolutely fine on about half the teeth, but then it jams. There's not enough internal drop. We can get around that by increasing the internal drop. Well, that will make it a lot more on all the other teeth. So we want to check first for bent teeth. We think this is eccentrically mounted. However, we probably want to avoid that if we can. Recolleting it would be my sort of last resort, really, because you've got to make a thing called a boxwood chuck to hold the wheel, which is great fun if you've all got lathe, a big lathe, but most people don't, and this is meant to be for beginners. But we will cross that bridge in good time. But let's just have a look at the escape wheel. I forget who it was last week, just said to recap on internal, external drop again. So here's our wheel. Let's just move that. Oh, we've got the pivot file giveaway, haven't we? Which we haven't done. Right, okay. Sorry, so many super exciting things. So don't go anywhere. Don't log off early because we're going to actually give away some pivot files because we don't know what to do with them otherwise. Right, okay, so here's our wheel. And I don't know how many teeth this pair of pallets embraces, but let's say for sake of argument, it's 7.5. It's always something and a half number of teeth. So at any one time, you've only got one active tooth, but that is working in a relationship with an other tooth. So for instance, the wheel's rotating anti-clockwise as we look at it here. There's one there with a stain on it, look. So let's start with that one. So let's say this tooth is the active tooth and it's pushing the pallets clockwise on the exit pallet. Somewhere around here will be the next incoming active tooth, which is going to land on the entry pallet. So just explain that a little bit more. So you've got all sorts of possible scenarios here. We did establish last week that it's probably eccentrically mounted, but if you think about those teeth, the teeth can either be both bent in one direction, those two kind of relation teeth. They can be bent in the other direction. One can be bent forward, one could be bent back. One could be short, one could be long. They both could be long, they both could be short. So we've got to think about all those potentials for causing problem with change in drop. Now, personally, I don't get too excited about it. You know, you do often hear on like television programs where the drop is going tick tock like that. Some people get really animated about it, each to their own, I guess. So it is, by the way, in our amazing book. If you want, there's a whole chapter on setting up the escapement. But very, very, very quickly, let's look at our pallets. I think we had our, yeah, we've got our escape wheel going anti-clockwise. See, it's a 30-hour clock. So going in that direction, you've got there's our pallets, and we've got a value that lies, sorry if I've explained this before, but I think it's just good to get it in our heads. So you've got a value between this is called the entry pallet, and this is called the exit pallet. I bet you all know, most of you know this off by heart now. So you've got a value here from leaving the tip of the entry pallet to landing on the exit pallet, which is called internal drop. and you've got the value from leaving the exit pallet and going all the way around and landing on the entry pallet, which is called external drop. And you can kind of figure out that the relationship between any pair of teeth that are whatever number of teeth that the escapement spans, the pallets always span n.5 teeth, changes that value of drop. We do need drop, we can't get away without it, but we want to minimize it, because if there's too much, then it's loss of energy and the clock's noisy and things. So what I'm going to do now is to use a bit of brass here, and I'm just going to make a gauge, just a little gauge, and I'm going to identify what I think is the sort of average OK tooth. Now, sometimes it's quite tricky because they all look so grim. It's going to take a few minutes just to file. Obviously, if you're doing this at home, you would spend quite a bit of time. Sorry, I'll hold it up to the camera. You can see there, it's a little bit fat there. Still a little bit wide there. Right, sorry, hold it in there where the camera. Still a bit needs taking off here. So, run out of time. Oh, thanks to everybody who bought tickets for the Icon event, by the way, that's on Monday. That event sold out. And if you're saying, Matthew, what's the Icon event? It's the Institute of Conservation thing we're putting together. But it will be recorded and it'll be on their YouTube channel. So next week, if I survive it, we will tell you where to find that link. Okay, sorry. I won't spend too much time faffing with this, but you can see that I really need to. Pivot files, yeah, I can, yeah. No, I can't talk about the pivot file giveaway. Right, we're going, in the past, we've given away tools. And last week we promised we'd do a pivot file giveaway. Right, well, there's a really rogue tooth, as you can see. Like that. So I want to talk about pivot files. Those of you who've been with us before know that I don't really do any filing of pivots. I personally think it's a pretty destructive process unless you're making a new clock. Join us, please, for the live stream on Thursday, because we're going to avoid a lot of pivot filing there. However, pivot files come in two types. So how many more minutes have we got? About 3 minutes, right? 5 minutes.
Just push the camera to the right.
Sorry, that's me. I'll just move myself to the left, it's easier. So you can see a good way of seeing where it's touching. I've just put a bit of blue pen, a bit like marking blue. You can actually see that there's a lot of variation between these teeth as we go around. A lot of difference. So not a surprise in the slightest that there's my gauge isn't still quite the right shape. It needs to be a bit more curved. You can see there, look, where it's been touching just there. So I just need to file off a little bit more there. So yeah, so pivot files. They come in two kinds, right-handed and left-handed. This was a question before, I think, was it Dell who said, why are they marked a gauche or a droite? Some people will know that. If you a Swiss watchmaker out there, our sincere apologies. And I think it's to do with the fact that on the continent, often the lathe headstock on a watchmaker's lathe is on the right-hand side, which seems crazy to us because we always see the lathe headstock on the left-hand side. But I think that's what it is. And when you look at pivot files, and Rachel's gonna be ready with her pen in a minute. So are you ready to say whatever the magic word is? You can see this one here, look, is marked D for droite, which means right, or a G for gauche, which is marked left. Yeah, there's one, look, that's marked G for gauche. And when you look at the end of the thing, I'll need to do a drawing because I don't think you'll be able to see it here, but the whole file is leaning over in one direction to keep it away from the shoulder of the pivot. And so let's just get this right. Yeah, so the right hand side one, so I should have thought about this, shouldn't I? So it seems to be that the gauche one, the left hand side one, is when the headstock is on the left of the work. So if you've got if you were making this new pivot, or if you're into repolishing your pivots, we're gonna have to do more on this next week, aren't we? But you would do it like that, and you can just about see that the pivot file is keeping away from the shoulder. But actually, the best way to use a pivot file, in my view, if you use one, is to use it underhand, under the work. And then you can see what work it's doing, whereas if you've got it on top, you can't see how much you're filing off if you actually want to file anything off in the first place. So it might be that it's the other way around. Anyway, explanation on a postcard, please. So if you want to win two of these pivot files, we've got the regular type with a so-called burnisher on one end, and then we've got the good old-fashioned type here, which needs a handle putting on it. So we're having pivot file giveaway. There might even be 3 in the magic package that comes to you wherever you are in the world. We'll post them out as we've done before. Put in the live text now, Valorbe, V-A-L-L-O-R-B-E, Valorbe, V-A-R-R-O-R-B-E. We'll give you 2 minutes to put your name in there, and then Rachel is going to pull one out of the hat. So she's crazily scribbling away. And we will come back to what you actually do with a pivot file next week. So back to our wheel, as you're all really, really busily typing Valorbe. So you can see the point of making this gauge. It helps you identify any particularly kind of rogue teeth. As I said here, I don't think that's a major problem here. Long teeth are interesting because you can do something called topping the wheel, which is basically removing some material from rogue longer teeth. But bear in mind, if you start doing that, then of course, you're also going to increase the amount of drop as well. So once you've made your gauge, obviously what you would do is you would make a plan of the wheel. So I would either photograph this or scan it or something, and then put a drawing of the thing. We've got here our beginning tooth. As I said, you don't need to mark it with a Sharpie pen. There's already a mark there, look, a stain. And I would number all these teeth on your drawing and then go around and say whether you think they're facing towards the direction of rotation, away from the direction of rotation, long or short. Long and short's quite difficult to tell. If you've got a lathe, again, you can set it with a lathe and some kind of pointer, or you can just make a hole in a bit of material, again, if you've got a lathe, or this thing. This would work for French clock. I don't think it'll work for our clock here. It's not big enough. No, it's not big enough. But again, the idea, if you can find something like this for the clock, I think for an American clock, this would work. I don't know how big the escape wheels are, but smaller than this. And that's a really easy way of telling whether the teeth are too long or too short or not. And then before we do the, how are you getting on, Rachel?
Good.
Right, busily scribbling away there. If you've got teeth that are bent, so it's not too long or too short, to straighten them, try not to bend them round because they tend to break off. A much better way of doing it is by kind of, well, still a form of straightening them, but sort of stretching them. So if you get a pair of smooth jawed, flat nosed pliers, something like these, good old dolphin pliers, and you actually kind of draw the tooth out in the direction, obviously, that you want to bend it. So it is still bending it, but it's not actually just kind of going like that, because you'll tend to find that that's too damaging. So just try drawing and straightening the teeth in the way that you want. I think this wheel has already been topped by the look of it. It's got quite a big land. And in all the talking we've done about internal, external, drop and drop, we've never talked about land. So we'll put that on our list for next week as well. But land is a kind of flat bit that you have on the top of the teeth, which you must have, otherwise the tooth has got no strength. You can see here, some of these are quite stumpy. So a little bit there, I'm making that gauge, right? It's ready for the draw.
Should I take them out?
No, it's all right.
Okay.
I'll draw one out. Here we are. And it is
Mike.
Mike. Is that Mike H?
Yes.
Mike H. So Mike H, if you want to get in touch with us, DM or email or something, I'll put it in the live chat. Put your address in the live chat and we will send you a pivot file package, which, depending on where you are, will take an amount of time to get there. So, yeah, summary from tonight then. When you try and refile the hole in the end of a mainspring, it breaks off, which was cool. But about this wheel thing, make a gauge. Try not to file anything off, because obviously once you've filed something off, then you've absolutely had it. You can't go back. And if you have gone round and you've straightened the teeth the best you can, and in this case, you can see that the wheel has been recolleted already. This is a later bit of material. Even that is problematic because let's say we get the wheel off the collet, which we can do easily enough. We can cut away the rivet and knock it off. It might be that the collet is eccentric, that the seat of the collet is eccentric, which in which case we're kind of laughing because we can just turn that down or put a new collet on. But if the bore in the middle of the wheel is eccentric, that's much, much, much more difficult. You cannot hold this wheel in a 3-jaw chuck. You can't even hold it in a 6-jaw chuck particularly easily, I would say. You have to make what it's called a wood chuck. And I'm happy to talk about that. I'm not sure I can demonstrate it here, but I have to think about how we're going to get around that. But you need a way of holding the wheel without damaging it. You could glue it onto something like a shellac chuck, I suppose. But again, you need a reference to make sure that it's absolutely concentric, because the amount of difference we're talking about is absolutely tiny. So we did get round to this eventually. We're going to put the other clock together next week because it's been in bits too long. Did anybody say what was along this project?
Oh, yeah, give me a minute, I'll find it.
Right, Rachel's looking back through there.
It was there though.
And how long is that?
1 year, 4 months for a long case.
All right, okay. So we've had somebody who's had a long case clock in bits for 1 year and 4 months, which is quite good. And that did get put back together again. It can be done. It can be done. Anyway, there we are. We've got through some fun tonight, as always. I'm sure we're well over time. We are over time. We'll leave the live chat open for a couple of minutes for everybody to say goodbye. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something at least. We'll promise talk about pivot files in terms of new making and in terms of restorations. I found these wheels, which I thought you might be fun, out of my so-called scrap drawer. And you can see this one's had a bit of a hard life. And what really thought was pretty amazing is what on earth has happened to it here? Anyway, let's not worry about that too much. But as you can see, there's a bit of rust on the pivot, which you might decide that you want to remove with the pivot file. So let's make this part of next week's discussion. And we've also got, I think it was one of our visitors, watchers, members who couldn't be here this week, want to go back and talk about the suspension spring thing and that hanging true. So as always, slightly chaotic and a million things to get through. We're never going to get to the end of it, but I hope you've had fun. Thanks for supporting us. See you in the week on Facebook. See you on Thursday for live stream if you're around, and maybe you'll see some of you on Monday night for the icon thing as well. So thanks very much, and take care.